Fold Kids Book Fest takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee Nation. The festival highlights the voices of authors, storytellers, and illustrators from across the country who are important and deserve to be heard. They've taken their time to create art and now they're here to share with you.
So what will you do with what you hear and learn? How can you use the lessons you learned today and throughout the year to be a leader in your community? Wherever you're watching this event, we hope that you find it engaging and thought-provoking. We hope that at Fold Kids Book Fest, you witness and experience the incredible power of stories.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fold Kids Book Fest. My name is JL, and I'm the executive director at Fold, and happy I Read Canada Day. If you are joining us live, it is I Read Canadian Day, and I just want to give a shout out to that, especially in light of our conversation today. We're going to be talking for about 60 minutes, and we're so excited to have our guests with us today. Before we begin, I just want to thank our sponsors and partners. A special shout out to our friends at the Ontario Library Association as well for helping us with this event. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. Karen Devonish-Mazzotta is a teacher librarian at the Toronto District School Board and a course director practicum facilitator with York University's Faculty of Education's French as a School Language cohort. She's a proud member of the Ontario Library Association and the co-chair of the Forest of Reading. Anuka Dey is currently an ELL/ELD itinerant teacher at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. She has taught globally and locally and chairs the Ottawa Carleton Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario Human Rights Committee. She serves as a board member for Parents for Diversity. Our next panelist is Michael Nyby. He is the former librarian at the W. Ross Macdonald School for the Blind and now works for Alternative Education Resources for Ontario, AERO. And finally, our moderator tonight is Lily Kwok. She is the Advocacy and Research Officer at the Ontario Library Association, dedicated to championing libraries as equitable spaces for learning and connection. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, JL. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight at Building Brave Libraries, Creating Inclusive Bookshelves in Challenging Times as part of Fold's Kids Book Fest. As JL mentioned, my name is Lily Kwok. I'm the Advocacy and Research Officer at the OLA, Canada's oldest and largest library association. We represent over 3,500 library professionals across the province. And along with advocacy and research, I am the staff lead on the association's anti-racism work, and I'm the staff liaison for the OLA's Anti-Racism Committee, Cultural Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and Indigenous Advisory Council. And I've also had the privilege of working on the Ontario Library Association's selection guide to school library resources. So I'm really excited to be here tonight with three amazing panelists, Karen, Anuka, and Michael. We're going to talk tonight about what it means to really build a diverse collection. So to start, let's, hear from each of you, your approach to building a diverse collection. How do you define a diverse collection in your particular context? And what does that look like in practice? Karen, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, how are you doing? Welcome, everybody. So nice to see you in person, Lily, after all we've worked on together. So I actually have a bit of an issue with the word diverse when referring to our collection. Like, I find the adjective very polysemous. And so it's often a word that, to me, refers to complex desires, processes, results, and it finds itself wrapped up in, sort of other essential elements of our existence of getting along as a community of human beings, like equity and inclusion when we talk about EDI and DEI. So when I speak about our collection and our school library, I'd like to say that our collection is sort of more, our collection is responsive, our collection is intentional. And when I say responsive, I'm sort of referring to the fact that our collection is in service of the population that uses it. And I'm not talking about just checking in and checking out books, but in fact, I'm not even necessarily talking about physical books at all, but rather a service that honors and celebrates, disrupts, distracts, entertains, confirms, pushes, pulls people, like just serving the myriad of reasons why the collection is sought out by the people who use the library in the first place. So at school, that has a lot to do with student voice at our school. And the learners, the ambassadors who come into the library, which is just about everybody, tells us how, what do they want me to buy, and what, sort of speaks to them. And what do they think shouldn't be in the collection? What things are, old and dated, and so it helps me to keep the collection very current. I try as much as possible to purchase books. There's so many books published every year, and so I try as much as possible to raise the age of the collection as much as possible, so that the users get, sort of access, and that being staff, students, and teachers. But it's also about, of course, reflecting student identity and the identities in our society, those who have been historically marginalized. It's a real, I'm very intentional about ensuring that those published works find themselves in our library, so that we can connect those authors and creators and expose students to their amazing work. So, yeah.
Thank you, Karen. I do like those words you use, responsive, intentional, really thinking about how you build your collection to reflect your students and what they want to see. Anuka, do you feel the same when you're building out your collection?
Absolutely. It always starts with the students that are in front of me. I've been building so I was a classroom teacher, and now I'm a support teacher, and I built my own library in my classroom because we didn't have a diverse selection. I've been teaching at that school for a long time, and all schools seem to be like this. And so I wanted books that reflected the kids I see in my classroom, right? So, and not books that were like, oh, here's an Indian girl doing things that are just about Diwali, but like just they're in a general context of they could be any character in any book kind of thing. So that's sort of where the conversation originally started. And really that moved me on to like making sure that the books were mirrors, they're windows, and the kids felt engaged in the books, and they were talking about the books, and they were sharing the books, and any authors I saw that they really enjoyed, and seeing them get joy from certain authors is where I really, okay, so this is what they want to read. So that's sort of really, I intentionally bought books that would help with their reading and build up their critical consciousness, right? Really, when it comes to it, my book collection, the more books I bought, the more it became about building critical consciousness in my classroom and talking about what's happening in the world and what books do reflect that they can engage in, but also to have books that they think are fun. So like a wide range of topics and not just one voice, but as many voices as I could get into my classroom.
You raise a really important point. You don't want the books just reflecting the identities of your students, but you want them to see things that, they may not be used to, develop that critical consciousness as you speak about. Michael, I know you come from a slightly different background, more of an accessibility type space. So how does building a diverse collection look like in your context?
Thanks. For me, it is a different approach for sure. When I consider the diversity of our collection, one of the primary concern that I have, or sorry, had, so I'm no longer in that role, was the diverse literacy needs of our student body. And I will say for the W. Ross Macdonald School, it is despite the one unifying factor of visual disability among our entire student body, it is probably one of the most culturally and ethnically diverse student bodies in the province of Ontario. And this is owing to higher incidence rates of visual disability among certain populations, and also a higher incidence rate of neurodivergence among children with visual disabilities. So there are a lot of identities to consider when building this collection, but we always come up against an obstacle in that what is actually available in formats that our students can consume. And there are several different levels of visual disability, and that's going to precipitate a number of different formats that students are going to prefer. And while there are maybe 3 or 4 students within the entire student body that can comfortably read a standard print edition, the plurality of students are fairly comfortable with 16-point large print editions, or 36-point large print, and do not read Braille. Naturally, nothing is printed in 36-point. And then there are going to be students that prefer audio. There's going to be students that read grade 1 Braille and students that read grade 2 Braille. So if a student comes to me and they say they're looking for a certain book or looking for a certain book that reflects their own identity, I may be hard pressed to actually find a book that is available for them in a format that they can read. And anybody who has tried to build a collection of large print books will know how difficult it is, how small how limited the availability of books in that format is, particularly for young audiences, because the main audience for large print books is significantly older than the population of the W. Ross Macdonald School. Now, if you think that it's bad trying to build a large print collection, try building a Braille collection, because very, very few books are actually commercially available in Braille. And so building this collection often requires leveraging partnerships with other organizations, and that includes CELA, includes NELS, and includes Arrow, which is the organization that I work for now, which are different services that provide resources in accessible formats, in a variety of accessible formats for students with visual impairments. And I think anybody who is working in a public school library should absolutely become acquainted with CELA in particular. If you are an educator, and this includes a school librarian, you are entitled to a CELA account. CELA is the Center for Equitable Library Access. It is a publicly funded service that creates and provides accessible digital editions and physical Braille editions of over 1.5 million titles. And I could not have done my job if it weren't for CELA. So anything that I couldn't actually get for the library, I would have to find from CELA, NELS, or Arrow. And without managing to leverage those partnerships, we could not have a diverse or even practical collection in any way.
Thank you for sharing CELA as a resource for our attendees tonight, Michael. Yeah, you seem to have like a two-pronged problem. You know, you are trying to build a diverse collection, one that covers a huge range of topics, like Anuka says. But at the same time, you're also trying to build an accessible collection that, you know, it comes in formats that are suitable for different needs, different students, and different challenges that they may have in literacy. So thank you all for sharing how you build your collections, what that looks like in your individual context. Let's move on to, you know, like what's at stake? You know, why do we need to protect diverse collections, and what is the current landscape we're working in right now? We know that over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of public attention around book challenges and censorship. And I also know, you know, right now, many educators and teacher librarians are facing challenges with funding. So what kind of pressures or challenges are you seeing in your work, and how are they impacting you? I actually wanted to start off with Michael first. I know you collected data through the Canadian Federation of Library Associations on book challenges in Canada, analyzing those trends and data. Can you tell us a bit about what you found and what the general landscape looks like right now in terms of book challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did serve as the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee of the CFLA for a year, and I was on that committee for 3 years. In my time there, I published a number of studies, quantitative studies specifically dealing with book challenge data in Canada and in the United States, for that matter. What we have seen. This sort of astronomical rise in censorship attempts at libraries really started in 2022, post-COVID, and it followed what happened in the US by about a year. The challenges that were common in Canada before that tended to be most commonly challenges to materials that were perceived to be racist, specifically challenges to materials that seem to be discriminatory against Indigenous populations were our most popular challenges. Since 2022, by a country mile, the most common challenges have been to books that are perceived to be pro LGBTQIA plus in any way. And that includes books that simply contain characters that are queer, even like, children's books with two moms, and nothing sexual whatsoever in the book. Those books get challenged left and right. It's been on the rise in public libraries, and it's been on the rise in school libraries. Unfortunately, with the CFLA, and this is the same issue that the ALA in the United States has experienced as well, it is much harder to quantify the problem in school libraries, because part of one sort of side effect of the deprofessionalization of the school library role is that many people who now work in school libraries don't have a background in or training in libraries and are not necessarily aware of the resources, and through no fault of their own, I should say, aren't necessarily aware of the resources and organizations that exist to support librarians. And as a result, data collection from school libraries is much, much more difficult. On top of that, school librarians often have to be concerned about retribution, particularly if there is a school board that is pushing to remove certain titles from their collection. While I was in that position, we had received a number of challenge reports from some school librarians who insisted that anything that they're reporting to us remains anonymous because they were concerned that they would lose their job if their board found out that they were reporting what their board was doing to the CFLA. So this is an ongoing problem, but I will say seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel. The last year of data collection that I was involved in was 2024, and we'd seen a not insignificant decrease from the heights that we saw in 2023 and 2022. It's still a much larger problem than it had ever been in the past, and is still overwhelmingly targeted to LGBTQIA plus materials. But it has become a bit more regionalized in the past year. It is still at extremely high levels in Alberta and British Columbia, particularly, and outside of the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. In Victoria and Vancouver are not necessarily receiving the same number of challenges. But in Ontario, in Quebec, and Eastern Canada, the levels have seemed to regress closer to the baseline that we saw before 2022. So I am optimistic that this problem is beginning to fade away in Canada. I don't want to speak too soon about that, but I'm hoping that we will be looking at this. I'm optimistic that we won't be dealing with this problem to the same extent in the future.
That's good to hear that in 2024, we do see some positive change. I have seen you present this data in the past, and it was alarming. So it's good to know that it could potentially be turning down. Karen, do you see these type of issues in your classroom? Have you had to deal with any parents or community members who've raised concerns about books that you're using with your students?
I have to say, I'm clearly quite, I don't know, fortunate that I work in a community that I think has a lot of varied perspectives, and a lot of people from a variety of social identities, and have learned to work well together. I think the library is a space of community and collaboration, and so in my school library, I do not see the sort of challenges that we've had to experience through Forest of Reading. And Lily, you've been so helpful in helping us, sort of craft responses to boards who have sort of opposed us including certain books, nominated books in our program. So I find my frustration, I have other frustrations, and Michael sort of referred to them as, sort of the deep professionalization of school libraries, or school librarians, which is unfortunate. And even the reduction of funding in Ontario certainly sort of sweatered money for just school libraries, and that's sort of been downloaded to school boards to decide how much they want to spend on libraries. And for myself, I'm a half-time teacher librarian in a school that's kindergarten to grade 8, over 700 students, where 3/4 of our population are intensive French programs, French immersion, or middle immersion. And so my frustrations are around having time to collaborate, do meaningful collaborations with teachers, all while sort of curating the collection and getting, really responding to the needs of the community, who are sharing it, full on. Like I'm hearing from them, but the time to be able to actually do the work meaningfully is just not there if you're only a half-time teacher librarian. But in addition to that, I'm a French as a second language teacher by trade. That's what I did first at my school. I was a French as a second language classroom teacher, and happy to be in the role as a French as a second language teacher librarian, but also serving the English programs as well. And my frustrations really come around being able to find material that is produced by, with, and for racialized populations, indigenous populations in French, primarily like first written in French. So we have quite a few translations, but even translations coming from English, large publication companies will have to sell a certain amount of units in English before they decide to translate into French. So one problem with that is that there's a delay in us getting those books in French. But two, if we're looking for books that are first published in French, there definitely is some gatekeeping happening at the level of, at the point of publication for French language publishers. So I find that quite frustrating in order to, sort of be responsive and be able to share with students those French language materials that do represent them and then the diverse population that they are, and do represent historically and presently marginalized communities. So that's definitely one of my frustrations.
Yeah, the French versions. Yeah, so your problem with not having enough time, we hear that all the time within the OLA and our members in the school library sector. Last year, the Ministry of Education changed the way that public education is funded. And previously, under the old model, the funding for school libraries was capped. So you had to spend a particular amount of that funding on school libraries and school library staff specifically, and that went away last year. So that has given free rein to boards to kind of, allocate and do what they want. So we are seeing a lot of great inequities in terms of, how people are being given enough time to do the role of a teacher librarian and so forth. Anuka, are you seeing similar things in your world?
I am. I think the biggest thing for educators and classroom teachers, again, comes down to funding, because there is no funding. I'm teaching at the University of Ottawa, language arts and arts, and I bring all my books in to show them, and their first question is, well, how do you buy these books? Like, the school must give you a certain amount of money to buy books for your classroom. I was like, no, no, no. You have to buy those yourself, right? And they're shocked, right? Because every week I'm bringing in all these books for them to see, so that they can understand what a library looks like that is representative of the kids in their classroom. So I think that's a big part of my frustration, and I think that's the biggest barrier for educators to build those diverse libraries. And yes, of course, our school libraries are getting much better. I would say since post-COVID, our school libraries are getting much better in building those diverse collections. But again, it comes down to funding. I teach at a small school this year, but the last 3 years I've been teaching across the city, and I can see the inequities between schools that have bigger populations in richer neighborhoods where parent councils have more money, versus the schools where really it's our racialized children, children with disabilities, our most like poverty-stricken families, those schools don't have as rich a literature collection and library, to no fault of anyone's outside of there's a lack of funding. They don't have a parent council to fund it. So teachers have to fund it, but teachers also don't have the money to continuously buy all these books and keep up to date. So I would say that's really where the frustration comes from an educator's perspective. Right? How do you represent your students in your classroom if you are constantly having to buy the books yourself?
Yeah. And part of collection building is being able to refresh those materials over time, keep them up to date. And how are we able to do that without funding?
Mhm.
So I like us to move on a little bit more into, the why of protecting diverse collections. As Michael mentioned, books that represent LGBTQ plus perspectives and characters tend to be targeted the most in book challenges. And as we know, when books are challenged, it's not just about the books, it's about the values behind them and the people they represent. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Why does it matter, especially for young readers, to see themselves and others reflected on the shelves? And what's at stake when these stories are censored or underrepresented? Anuka, as a board member for Parents for Diversity, I'd like to start with you.
I mean, yeah, so this is a hard question. So I will say, often it's important because if we don't have diverse voices, it's harmful to our students, right? They're only seeing one perspective. They don't see themselves. They don't think that their lives are worth sharing because, again, like I grew up only listening to one voice, right? Diverse collections were not a thing. And then what happens with a student's identity is either they start to code switch or they align themselves with whiteness to feel like they can fit in so that they're not uncomfortable in the situation. When it comes to your identity, you're trying to be normal, whatever that means, but through books. And it's important to have these books and have these collections so that they don't feel like the other, right? That they don't feel like they don't belong and that they have to change who they are when they go into certain spaces to be somebody else. And as a child, you internalize that. And as you're getting older, you're just going to continue to like push your identity down until it's too difficult for you to do it anymore and you don't know how to cope with it. And I know, I mean, that might sound extreme considering we're talking about books in classrooms, but I do think it has that large an impact on a lot of people in my generation who didn't have a chance to see themselves. So having children have the opportunity to stand in their own identity, have the opportunity to read about all kinds of other people really allows them to understand what's happening in the world because they have more access to things that we didn't have access to, right? They have access to the internet, they have access to social media, they know what's happening in the world like so quick, and they repeat what they're hearing. So in order to build that critical consciousness, we can't censor books, we can't underrepresent the most marginalized people because everybody needs to understand their experience as much as we need to understand the experience of the majority. So kids learn from that. Kids take it their way. Kids are really, really smart. And if we give them that opportunity to do the critical thinking and read and understand and listen and make up their own minds according to who they are and what they believe, I think we can reach amazing things in the future.
I hear you. Myself, I'm sure a lot of people here can relate. Growing up, you only saw one type of person on TV, and you only had stories about certain types of people, and you grew up thinking, okay, this is what I need to aspire to be, and the kind of people I should date, and this is the standard for beauty. And it takes a lot of conscious rewiring to overcome that. Karen, what about you? Well, why is it so important to have diverse collections?
Well, I'm gonna call my mom here. I'm gonna pay homage to her. I have to say, growing up, I watched her consciously disrupt that all the time. Like we were one of the first, we were not one of the first, we were one of the few Canadian families that had, for example, Ebony Junior. Ebony is a periodical that's mainly features African American stories, narratives, and they created at one point in the late 70s, early 80s. That's how old I am. An Ebony Junior that was mainly sent out to students in the States, and somehow or the other, we found it in Toronto in my home. And I have seasons and seasons of Ebony Junior that I poured over, in the summers and over vacations and whatnot. And that was my mother disrupting that tendency to have that one voice, and for me to be able to see myself in fun, joyful, ludic material, even is what I needed as a child. So I see myself sort of doing that same sort of thing. I heard Anushka sort of referring to Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's work, who is a professor at the Emerita. Now she's like 88 years old, for God's sakes, at Ohio State University, and we call her the mother of multicultural leadership, literature, and that whole concept of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, I think really inspires us as teacher librarians and tells us that the work we have to do is important. So the windows is that we can see other perspectives, that I think our libraries give us the opportunity to hear other narratives, to be exposed to other voices. And we know that that exposure is the seeds of empathy, the seeds of, community, the seeds of collaboration across, perceived differences and maybe real differences as well. But that doesn't mean that we can't build society together. We have to, in order for us to all exist. And through imagination, students will start to, through empathy, sort of walk in the lives and maybe try to understand better those other narratives. And that's the sliding glass doors. And if the lighting is just right, we start to see ourselves. A window becomes like a mirror. And it's really important for students, of course, to see themselves in material. And then, I think about all formats of materials, and this is where my frustration comes in, not just in, English, picture book for young children, but also in graphic novels, but also, in board books, but also in books that are written, in Braille, in accessible formats. And this is what we have to push to sort of have this happen, so that a person who is Black identifying, let's say for myself, like myself, can be able to find a book and find stories that represent me in the ways that I'm able to access it. It's interesting. At our school, we tried something really novel last year with my colleague, Leanna Bornstein. We did sort of a classroom, community-based diversity audit, library audits. And we actually had the grade 3-4 students do their own audit of the library. So we first started with Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's work and sort of shared that research with them. Now, keep in mind, that research was done in the 90s. So even all this pushing back at, no, I don't want to see, identities from various communities, we need to have these one, majority dominant voice, sort of that material available to us that we're seeing now in 2025 is crazy, because those are the same messages that were happening in the 1990s, which were the sort of impetus for her doing her work. So we really need to stop as a society and think about how we have to push towards change, and push against, the sort of these tendencies towards, trying to exclude, and think more about include. Nevertheless, the students did their own diversity audit of our French children's book collection and found pretty much what Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop found in the 1990s, that when we looked at over, 450 books, we found that close to half of those books had exclusively white characters. The students had asked interesting questions about, Madame, why on earth are there so many darn children's books with animals? And then we talked about that quite a bit. And they were like, I think they're trying to avoid being exclusive, or trying to avoid featuring, let's say, racialized characters, or featuring characters that demonstrated, or wore certain clothing, or you know, had certain, I don't know, modes of movement. And so if they just use like an animal, it seemed like neutral. I mean, that came out of the mouths of grade 3s and 4s when they really stopped and looked at what is happening, what is in our collection. And I thought that was, very interesting, especially since I'm sitting there trying to, really curate and feature and disrupt as well. But even with all of that, that just shows how strong those voices are, those exclusionary voices coming out of publication, companies, that you still end up with, half of, the books that the students selected randomly with exclusively white characters.
Wow. I never thought about animal characters as being used as like a neutral kind of, avoidance of showing racialized people. But that's really interesting, especially for grade 3 and 4 students to pick up on. Michael, what about you? You're working in a very specific context. You've done a lot of work in intellectual freedom. What brought you to that work? Why do you think that's valuable?
I'll say that the first thing that I want to get into when we talk about this is uh, building literacy skills at this age is, of course, crucial. Once someone gets to a certain age, it becomes much, much more difficult to build literacy skills. So if we are not encouraging reading by providing materials that are interesting and also readable by our students, then we're not serving our students very well at all. And I want to just like do just a couple of examples as illustration of this. One of the problems that we really find with children with visual disabilities outside of larger school districts that have the resources for it, and I want to single out Toronto District School Board in particular. Toronto District School Board has a very robust vision services department. And so we don't actually get very many students from Toronto at the W. Ross Macdonald School because they support their kids with visual disabilities much better than a lot of other school districts can. And naturally, they're big enough and they have the money to do that. But, visual disability is not geographically dependent. And so, a student who's going to school in Thunder Bay or Sudbury or at James Bay is not going to have those same resources. So if they are fortunate enough to come to us, then we can provide the resources to the best of our ability. But I want to provide an example here of how important it is for children to be properly supported with resources that they can read. We had a student start at the beginning of last year, at the beginning of the 2024-2025 school year, in grade 5. She was 10 years old. She had been told, or her parents had been told, that she would never know how to read. This child was not blind. She was partially sighted, and she did not have any other particular learning disabilities, which honestly is not the most common thing with children with visual disabilities. She came to our school she didn't know her alphabet. She could not read at all. Within the first year she was there, she went from sounding out words in reading level A, easy readers, to reading level K in 1 year at 10 years old. Her parents were absolutely stunned. They thought she would never read. They thought that her opportunities in life would be extremely limited. All she needed was the resources available and the people who knew how to bring her those resources and help her with those resources to be able to read. She's going to need to read large print, and that's not a problem, particularly now that we live in a mostly digital society. She's not going to have any problem with this. She's an extremely intelligent and inquisitive young child who has been cheated out of her education for the first 6 years that she's been in our public education system. On a similar note, within our school branch are 3 schools for children who are deaf or hard of hearing. Many of the children who end up getting referred to those schools, many of them get there at age 8, age 9, age 10, and they may be able to read, but some of them cannot read and have no language. They cannot even communicate because the schools that they attended beforehand had no resources. They came from underprivileged communities. Their parents did not have the money to seek out resources for them. And honestly, sometimes it's a matter of the parents not having the opportunity to seek out the resources for them because these public resources that are provided by the province are free. The issue is that a lot of smaller school systems don't have anybody on staff who are aware of the resources that are available for them. Um, so really what it comes down to is that we need to provide every child with what they need to be able to achieve literacy and be able to close the gap between their abilities and the requisite abilities that society has imposed upon them in order to be a functional member of society. That is our responsibility, is not the children's responsibility. And I don't even want to say it's the parents' responsibility because the parents are not trained to do this. It's the educators that are trained to do this. And the issue that we have right now is that, especially in these smaller school boards, as Karen had mentioned beforehand, there are no resources available. There is no money available. And the province continues to cut more and more funding to education. And that makes it harder and harder for these school districts where a lot of the EAs are working 2 or 3 jobs. I'm sorry, I could go on about this all day, but I think I've made my point. It is incumbent upon us. And I think it's super important for parents to know what's going on, particularly parents whose children do not have any sort of visual or sensory perceptual disabilities, to know that this issue is affecting the colleagues and peers of their children, to know that their schools are not serving their populations the way that they should be. Everybody needs to know this. The parents need to know this because the parents are the ones who vote. That's all I'm going to say about that because I still work for the province, and if I go any further, I might lose my job.
I appreciate the passion, Michael. And as you mentioned, voting, municipal elections in Ontario are next year. So something to remember. So we are 20 minutes out from the end. I just want to remind attendees that if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. You will have time at the end of this panel for questions, about 10 or 15 minutes. But before we get to that, let's talk solutions, because many attendees tonight are fellow educators, teacher librarians, and they're looking for ideas, practical ideas for tackling these challenges that we've been talking about tonight and building those diverse collections. So I'd love to hear from each of you some concrete strategies that help you sustain your collections in face of limited funds, in face of other challenges that you're facing in your space. I'm going to open the floor up to whoever would like to start off.
Well, I was thinking, yeah, like I do a lot of consulting and partnerships with independent bookstores in order to be able to find out more about also independent local authors who are doing great creation and are maybe only able to sell through these distributors in order to continue to add and enhance our collection. We do a lot of partnerships also with the local public library as well, who carry different things than we have. We only have limited shelving space, of course, in our library compared to the public library. So we're very intentional about having good connections with the public library and ensuring that the students are able to easily get a library card. TPL is such, Toronto Public Library, it's such an wide and an amazing sort of organization. So we really try as much as possible to make that connection that and have library joy that exists outside of our school community. We have a living library at my school, so not only do the students have access to books and physical resources, but also people who we invite in, elders. We're really fortunate to be down the road from Canada's first Black Arts Center, the NIA Center. So we did a collaboration with them. And like I said, we invite local artists and authors in, so the students can be exposed to all that our local community has to offer. But I would say another way that I am able to and it sort of is, it seems in contrary, but buy books that our students need and reflect them, but using funds that are generated through something like the Scholastic Book Fair. We recently had it, and I mean, I wouldn't suggest it in of course communities that aren't able to make a lot of money in Scholastic Book Fair, but ours is able to make enough that sort of half of whatever profits that we make, we're able to spend on the school library. And often I use that money to replace material that's starting to age. And then with what limited funds I get from the TDSB, I'm able to go out and buy independent, or material that you may not get through a large publisher or a large distributor, but through local bookstores. So it's sort of a bit of a shell game I play. And it does require, at least the Scholastic solution does require to some extent, you be able to run that kind of program. But once you do, if you're strategic, you can think about ways with very limited funding to still get the students what they need to get.
I appreciate your point on partnerships, making it a community effort, turning to your public library as a partner, your local art community center as a partner, and using those resources already available to you to make things work. I'll pass it on to Anuka. How are you dealing with your funding challenges?
I think so. Absolutely. I will go to a public library and pick up a set of books that if kids want to read, so they can read them, because often they may not have access to it due to, parents having more than one job and language barriers and just not knowing what books to get. So often I will go to a library and pick up books, and we're like, okay, for this 2 weeks, these are the books that you have in the classroom that you can use. Other things I do, we live in an online world. There are some incredible websites with dual language books. As a teacher of multilingual learners, I highly encourage parents to read to their children in their first language. So if they have books in their first language, tell stories in their first language, because the more they're steeped in literacy in their first language, they're going to be able to transfer those skills into English and French. So I send home websites that they can go to where they can access dual language books, so they can read it in their first language. So that way it's free, right? So it's a good way to support those families and not have to buy books. Outside of that, I go to a lot of book sales. Like a lot of our schools in Ottawa, from the more prosperous neighborhoods, have huge book sales. The schools have them. So I try and get in there the first that I can. I encourage teachers to go. And I think a lot of teachers go to those book sales because the books are not what I would buy at a bookstore. And then you can buy a larger amount of books to support literacy in your classroom. Something else that I do is I did something similar to Karen, is look at small bookstores, because small bookstores, like I look at the website on a different book list or another storybook shop, or in Ottawa we have Octopus Books. And then even if I go into the stores, I talk to the people who are in the stores, because they know tips and tricks that I don't know, right? So they can guide me towards authors. They can tell me the history of authors. If I say, this is the kind of student that's sitting in front of me, what would you recommend? They are always willing to be like, oh, wait, I have, and they're not books that you find at Chapters or on Amazon. They're completely different. And so, I mean, it's hard for me to go in because I spent half my paycheck there, but it's one of those things, right? Like, you come out with a list of books that you won't find anywhere. They've got more information than going into a big brand bookstore. So even if I don't buy those books, I'll take pictures of it and have a list. So then when my librarian comes out, or when my principal says, okay, let's look at what books are out there, or if somebody, an educator, asks at a school that I'm working at, who says, can you recommend some books for this? I have a list already made. So I continue to build that list. So when I need it, I can refer to it and then we can figure out a way to purchase it. So like slowly building it instead of trying to build it all at once, I think would be the best step in this kind of situation.
You heard it here first. Support your local independent bookshop. Okay, and what about you, Michael? How are you handling, the lack of accessible formats and sourcing the things that you need?
Again, it's about partnerships. Our funding has been decreased significantly in the time that I was at the W. Ross Macdonald School. And even when I started there, I heard, a lot of our educators would talk about the glory days of 2017 when we had discretionary funding. So building my collection was, done with extremely limited funds and through the generosity of some of our partners. And I already mentioned CELA. One thing that CELA allowed me to do was to, when physical Braille editions were sent out to our students, when the students returned them, CELA did not require me to send them back to CELA. I was able to keep them within the library collection because these are editions that are made for students with visual impairments. They're not necessarily made for one specific student with visual impairments. That was a big boon, and I managed to get a lot of Braille copies of Braille editions of titles that are not commercially published in Braille, and that was very, very fortunate. In addition, CELA also provided us for free with sort of a pilot flight of audiobook listening devices with tactile buttons called Envoy Connect. And anybody in a library who's working in a library who has a CELA educator account, you can actually get onto CELA and request an Envoy Connect 2 for any student or library patron with visual disabilities. It's a really handy tool for listening to audiobooks with a tactile interface. And I want to stress how important that is for people with visual disabilities. Many people who prefer audiobooks for their method of consumption of literature do not like the way that digital editions work because listening to a digital audiobook requires the use of a visual interface. And if you cannot access a visual interface, particularly, and I'm going to call out Apple here, particularly for having some of the worst accessibility features, native accessibility features on their devices in the world. If you're using an iPhone and you have to somehow get a digital book onto your phone and then listen to it without vision, you're going to have a hard time. So many people who prefer audiobooks prefer physical audiobooks on CD because of the tactile nature of putting that in a disc player and hitting the play button. The ability of using these Envoy Connect devices with tactile buttons has been a boon for many of our students. In addition to that, I want to, if there's anybody who's here watching this seminar who is involved with the Canadian Children's Book Centre, thank you so much for everything you do. They are an absolutely fantastic organization, and they provided our school with a fleet of Kobo e-readers. And as I mentioned earlier, many of our students can read large print but need 24, 28, 32 point font. You're not going to find books published in that font, but you can make any book that font if you've got an ebook version of it. So by downloading ebooks from CELA and putting them on these Kobos that the CCBC provided for our school, I was able to get my students basically any book they wanted to read. And once I had those devices there, my job became a lot easier and a lot less frustrating. So, until we get that revolution that we need to reject our neoliberal social architecture and education is once again prioritized within our society, we've got to really rely upon the generosity of these organizations who are out there doing really, really great work to get these materials to the kids who need them. So thank you to CELA, thank you to NELS, and thank you to the Canadian Children's Book Centre for everything you do.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we are coming close to the end. So just double checking if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. If not, I do have a question myself, I'm hoping that we could end on a positive note, looking forward, looking towards the future. And so I'd like to hear from all of you, what gives you hope in this moment? Are there any particular trends, movements, community responses that make you optimistic about the future of diverse collections? Is there any advice you'd like to give to any of the attendees out here trying to build a diverse collection in their school or a library?
Yes, there is a really, you know what? Personally, I hate social media, but there is one great thing that social media has brought to the teens at my school, and I hate to say it, but it's Book Talk. Book Talk and BookTube have provided these like book nerd kids that are just like I was at their age with this social network of people who are just like them, who want to talk about books, who just want to nerd out about books together. And this has made nerdy stuff cool. And I just love it. I like when my kids come in and they say, "Hey, I heard about this book on Book Talk. Can you get it for me?" I mean, 9 times out of 10, I can't because it's some self-published romantasy that's 100% inappropriate for a school library. But that one time that I can get it, I can't tell you how gratifying it is for me to get those. And the other thing it has done, that nerdy kid, other librarians here, maybe you can relate to this. I was that nerdy kid who at like age 13 was like checking out classics, reading Dickens and Moby Dick and stuff like that. Those kids still exist. And those kids have Book Talk and BookTube communities of like 17-year-olds who just want to talk about Steinbeck. And when I get one of those kids that comes into my classroom, I'm like, where was this when I was a kid? And I really, as much as I hate TikTok with all my heart and soul, I got to admit that Book Talk is doing good things. And I really also want to stress that we should not judge the quality of the content that our kids are reading because art is subjective. There's no such thing as good art or bad art. As Duke Ellington said, if it sounds good, it is good. And if these kids think these books sound good, well, dag nabbit, they are good. So let's not judge what our kids are reading. Let's just be happy that they're reading. So thanks, Book Talk. Can't believe I'm saying that.
Book Talk. Anuka, how about you? What's giving you hope right now? Anything over your pond that's making you feel like the future is still bright?
The kids. I'll be honest, it's the kids. They are gravitating to books. They are now where I feel like 5 or 10 years ago, it was like, oh, chapter books are for grade 4, and a lot of kids couldn't access it and they didn't know. But now this whole graphic novel era has been fantastic for kids who cannot always access chapter books, right? At a junior or intermediate classroom, or even little kids who want to be like an adult and read a bigger book, and they cannot. So this genre of graphic novels, which have such deep meaning and have such great stories that any child can really access, even if they can't physically read the words sometimes, right? At whatever age they are. So that definitely gives me hope. Organizations like Parents for Diversity, absolutely. I found out about them during COVID, and I started looking for books through them and attending their workshops and getting to understand it. And I've been fortunate enough to join their board of directors, but really it's because they offer these ideas of books that are out there for all our children to be able to read. And again, I said before, all these websites that have free access to books and dual language books that any child in Canada can read in whatever language is comfortable for them and continue to build those literacy skills that they need and get into those stories. Like, to see a kid walk into a story and just be in that story and be so happy and want to tell you about it and what's happening, like, that's where the joy is in my mind.
So Forest of Reading that Karen is co-chair of has a festival every year, and my favorite part is the children screaming for books. I totally feel you on that, Anuka. And so Karen, let's end with you. What's giving you hope right now?
Well, you don't want to end with me because they just stole my thunder. Those were the two things that I was actually going to mention. Was that recently I'm doing research with Dr. Nyby at the iSchool, the library school at the University of Toronto, and we're looking at pleasure reading, identity, and experience, particularly with French and FSL teenagers. And that's exactly what we found, that we didn't expect to, but the amount of time that the students mentioned discoverability around books through social media, and finding these wicked communities, and particularly if students were looking for Black, racialized, Indigenous authors content, they were finding it 100 times through social media. So that has been so hopeful and so wonderful. And I really think it reduces isolation, particularly for the students that we spoke to who were in, sort of smaller communities who didn't have access to great bookstores like, and I'm going to name them all, The Different Book List, Another Story, Glad Day Bookshop, Good Minds, Strong Nations, that they really enjoyed having the opportunity at least to get together with the community. What's great about those small independent bookstores too is that you can always, like Anushka said, go online, see what they're reading, see what they're suggesting, and you can order from them and get it sort of delivered to your home. The other thing was graphic novels. I was mentioning that. I was thinking, and Anushka, I know you mentioned it, that that I think we have to change our mindset around graphic novels. Not us, the teacher-librarians. We know this already. It's mostly classroom teachers that you got to convince. I'm a JI teacher by training, and every year I have to do my graphic novel spiel about how it's really actually quite sophisticated inferencing, and how it's just as good in terms of challenging literature as a chapter book. But last thing I would say for advice is just, follow the needs of the learners. Have courage. This week, Treaties Recognition Week, I was speaking to students about Haudenosaunee philosophy of 7 generations, that what we do now has impact for 7 generations. So work with intention, know that it will have impact, know that it will change the landscape of the future, and know that our decisions now will have an impact on what children think, what they believe, and how they act. So we're doing good work. We just need to keep it up.
Thank you so much, everyone. It sounds like the youth are going to be okay. They are finding community online and they're enjoying themselves. So we've come to the end of the panel. Thank you so much for the 3 of you for joining us today. I'm going to pass it back on to JL.
Thank you guys so much. I don't know if I should mention this, but we have a group chat for the team, and it's like blowing up. The quoting you guys. Everybody's fired up. We're like gonna go save the world now. So thank you so much for your inspiration, your thoughts. I was trying to take down quotes. The page is full. So thank you for the wisdom, Lily. Thank you for the thoughtful moderating, Anuka, Karen, Michael. Thank you for being here tonight. The recordings from this event will be available inside the platform to watch and rewatch through to December 9th or through to the end of the school year, depending on your pass. If you'd like copies of festival titles, our official bookseller for schools and libraries is Tin Lids. We have a book list available in our library that you can see all the titles that are covered at the festival this year. Our library looks like this. It's full of resources for each of the books and each of the authors, as well as our educator guide. So for all of our virtual events, there are pre and post event activities that you can do with your students to sort of expand each of the individual events with your students, your class, your families, the kids in your home. So take advantage of that. Also our exhibitor hall. So in addition to resources from Fold, there are also resources from some of our sponsors who are in orange, and then in blue, some of our partners. Kegedon's Press, I think, was mentioned in the session. They're an Indigenous publisher, and so different places that you can go to get additional resources to support the kinds of thinking, the responsiveness that was talked about in today's session. If you are watching this in your home, you're coloring, you're knitting, you're doing whatever, take a picture, post it. It's so exciting to see people joining from across the country and really just showing what you're up to when you're doing it. Makes us feel like we're all together, even though we're, warm and cozy in our own homes. You can use the hashtag FoldKids25. Thanks again for being here. Keep reading Canadian and enjoy the rest of your day.